it as the pop-up just happened. And then finally, just, the scheduled programming we'll have 3 great panelists to go through. I'll have them introduce themselves in a minute and go through their backgrounds and, their interest in co-design and what they've done in the field a little bit. And then we'll go through a bunch of questions that we've kind of set up to really go through kind of a whistle-stop through what co-design kind of means, some of the fallbacks, and then we'll go through questions. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. So post those as you kind of as they come up for you and as you're listening to the conversation, and then we'll pick them up through the conversation, or we'll go through them at the end. And then also we'll have some extra time at the back for additional questions you might not have had a chance to ask in the chat yet. So really looking forward to this. So without further ado, Abe, maybe I can throw it to you first with a bit of an introduction, and we'll get things going.
Hi, everyone. Good to be with you. My name's Abe Sahely. I am the co-founder of beNeXT, which is a legal tech startup. We've been out and in business for the last couple of years. Before that, I was a partner at Accenture in the digital group and had a long career there and did a lot of co-design with a lot of large enterprises. So I've got a good background in that, as well as applying the same sort of co-design principles in the startup I run.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Abe. Thanks for joining. Shirli, you want to go next?
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be with you. I come to you from Gadigal country in lockdown in New South Wales. My background is legal, and I am a problem solver, mediator, and facilitator. And most recently, I'm the co-founder of Elker, which provides software for Tell Us Anything for workplaces and projects. So think of a digital two-way suggestion box that is encrypted and gives you two-way chat. And so I have a long history in facilitation and thinking about how that applies to the design of technology.
Awesome. Thanks, Shirli. Thanks for the intro. And finally, Stu.
Yeah, g'day guys. Great to be here. I'm Stu Rasmussen. So I'm the founder of a legal tech company as well called Syncly. My background has always been sort of sales and commercialization and client success. So having, before being the founder of a startup, a lot of my time was spent working with professional service firms, accounting, legal, banking, on the purchase and acquisition of the product, but then also the implementation of those products. And a lot of those aren't out of the box. So there's a lot of co-designing that goes involved in the building out of the solution, fitting those in the organizations, working with the change management and so on. So yeah, happy to be here and keen to sort of give you my input.
Awesome. Thanks, Stu. So thanks all for the panelists who are here today. Just to kind of kick things off, and before we deep dive into co-design and all of its interesting facets, maybe it's good to have a quick look at just legal tech in general and kind of where we are kind of as a kind of a growing stream of technology and technological innovation. Maybe, Abe, do you have some ideas around kind of what do you perceive is currently the state of legal tech in Australia and wider?
Yeah, look, I think firstly, people implicitly get the idea that there's some things that can be improved in the legal space with technology. There's a lot of activity tasks that have repetition associated with them, customer experience issues, those sorts of things. So technology feels like a natural fit for legal, and it's probably been a little slower than some other industries. So the pace is really picking up, it's accelerating. And that's what we're finding. So there's a lot of good activity going on. I think the second thing I wanted to point out was that I think there are two angles to it. One is
they're all ganglion like that.
Sorry, quick interruption. Could all the people on the call please mute their channels?
Thanks, guys. Yeah. So the second point was I think there are two angles to it. One is the legal tech that's focused on legal professionals and helping legal professionals do their job better. And then the other side of it is the legal tech that's more focused on the end customer of the legal professional, but also draws in the legal professional. I think that's an interesting distinction to make, and we're seeing a lot of, players looking at it from both sides.
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's cool.
Yeah, it's bang on. And I spent a lot of time around what I call the recipient of the legal services, that productized legal services, or those online legal services aspect of it, which is fascinating because it's giving way to what we classify as the new law segment, right? For lack of a better term, it seems like we've gravitated towards that. And new law is all about sort of, providing legal services with a different commercial outcome or a different commercial model or a different sort of service provider aspect, which often involves either technology from start to finish or technology as part of that process. So I think that's really, really key. I'm also seeing a ton of investment going into legal tech, right? Like it's going berserk at the moment. So lots of companies from all around the world, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, it's happening all over the place. And the fact that we're selling globally now means that there's no such thing as sort of, regional restrictions and global sort of restrictions. So it's becoming a fairly busy market, which is also, in my experience, provided challenges around adoption. What the heck am I supposed to be looking at? There's too much to look at. There's 6 of the same product, which is the best one? Do I care about the best one? All that sort of stuff. So it's not without its challenges as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks both. And Shirli, maybe if I ask you, if you look at legal tech, is there something you're seeing that you're really excited about? Something that's relatively recent, or something that's moving, or a challenge area that you've seen in the kind of legal profession that you've always wondered how it could be improved, and now you're seeing some movement there?
Look, I think one of the things that's incredibly exciting is you just heard Abe and Stu talk about what would traditionally have been legal tech, which is stuff for lawyers or their clients. But if you look at something like Elker, for instance, it's neither for lawyers nor their clients, but yet we're comfortable to call ourselves part of the legal tech. Because if you look at the world now, and I think COVID is a very good example of that, the need to comply and with regulations and things as societies get more and more busy and complex is huge. So what's incredibly exciting is that there's this fusion between law and just making things function better. So there's been a breakdown in what is traditional law, and lawyers have become much more involved in general problem solving. Like, how do we get people back to work? How do we vaccinate people? How do we make sure people can give feedback in a really productive way to make our cultures wonderful? And that's really lovely because it just gets rid of that kind of definition of lawyer at the sideline to lawyer as a big contributor in the general economy. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Those are really, really exciting areas. And while you kind of have the virtual microphone, Shirli, kind of going into kind of the next slide, which is really around co-design and what we're here to really discuss. When we were preparing for this panel chat, we were talked a little bit about the different types of co-design that kind of people and what people could consider co-design, right? And maybe, do you have some thoughts around kind of what would you consider kind of the 2 or 3 kind of key clusters of co-design types, and as you kind of encounter them around?
Okay, so look, I think if you were to go back to the literature and say what is co-design, in a very typical way, co-design is client and provider designing the technology together, and that's like a very technical discussion on it. But I think that it's a continuum. And when I was thinking about it and talking to my 15-year-old about it, a really good example of that is, on one end of this spectrum, you can go in, you can buy a computer with all the specs and the software pre-installed and take it home and use it. On the other end of the spectrum, you can sit down with somebody and spec your computer and your software and build it from scratch. And in the middle of that, there is something different, which is what I call collaboration. And I think that co-design is very much like that. It's designing tech between the provider and the supplier. And it's also including things like Stu and I were talking about yesterday, using existing tech for a new purpose, or using a design process for existing tech to see how a particular piece of technology might fit into an ecosystem that already exists for you. And all of that is collaboration, and all of that requires the fulcrum of control to be shared between the supplier and the person buying it, and the end user sometimes.
Okay, great. Other views from the panel on that particular, the different kinds, Stu, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think Shirley just mentioned it's a continuum. So I think the thing is, yeah, if you look at it traditionally, it might have been a term that came out of technology, right? Agile, all these sorts of terms that come out from the development element of what we're talking about here. But it certainly is an aspect that can be a portion or a part of the journey, right? So often what I was involved in is, I already had a product that I was positioning into an organization. So they had no input in terms of like what the product did and how it functioned and what it looked like, right? But what it was then saying is, okay, well, we know that one size doesn't fit all. So take our product and then manipulate it, configure it, set it up, implement it to benefit your specific work practices. And so in the element of co-design there, it was, hey, we have a product, these are the restrictions, and it's not an open floor sort of conversation here. There are certain areas that we can't go because it's the product. But in the essence of making this work in your organization, tell me how you work. What are your processes? What are your pain points at the moment? And then you enter into that co-design phase without even really realizing it, right? Because otherwise you're just sort of putting a square peg through a round hole and hoping that eventually it'll shrink. And so, yeah, I think that's a key portion of it, right? It's not the whole end-to-end journey. It can be just a small portion of it as well.
That's some good points there. Probably one other angle I'll add to this is from a design process perspective, people think of it as being divergent thinking and then convergent. So the idea being that you're helping you're collaborating to think broadly and creatively to start with, within the framework of whatever area you're in, and brainstorm ideas. How can we use this suite of products, technology, etc., to solve problems? And then you're going, okay, we've thought broadly and creatively here. How do we bring it back together and get pragmatic and go, with all the great ideas we've come up with here, what's the right path to take? Bang for buck, the usual things that come up. What's the pragmatic practicality of the change that we're looking at? So that's I guess a broad perspective on it as well.
It might be also useful to have a couple of examples at this point, because I think sometimes that makes it kind of real, And so an example of that is ours is, as I described it in a summary way, a digital field feedback tool. And you can understand how you might use that in a workplace where you get people to tell you good, bad, and ugly, so you can action it. But a good co-design project might be, without giving client names away, is we're working with somebody who's setting up specialist housing in disability. And the question becomes, we need to get feedback from all the people in those ecosystems about what might be going on in the specialist housing. What are ways that we can configure this technology in order to meet that need? And that might be about setting up a team that includes clients who might have disabilities, service providers who might be running the housing and running the facilities in the housing, and the people who actually are responsible for the house, to work out how does this work for all of those people and who does what. And that's a really good example of a co-design where you're using existing technology for a slightly different use case.
It's really about immersing yourself in the problem, in the problem of the customer. Really getting a handle on what's going on in the customer environment, and then applying the solutions to that. So it's starting from that side, which is really powerful.
Yeah, no, those are really good points, and I think examples do really help to really explain kind of what it is that we understand as kind of co-design and where it can be supportive. Quick note, because I saw that quite a few other people have joined in the last kind of couple of minutes. Please post any questions you have in the chat of the channel, and then we'll take those with us and kind of keep the conversation going. And at the end, there'll be some time for other questions as well, if the time allows. But in the meantime, please don't kind of hold up questions if you have them. Just post them in the chat. We'll incorporate them into the conversation as we kind of go through these themes. I think it's really great. Stay on kind of examples. Stu, I'm curious, do you have an example of kind of a co-design kind of moment that you really recollect well, and where you thought it kind of worked well, and where you had it is a good outcome from taking more of a co-design approach with what it is that you were doing?
Yeah. So I can give you, I mean, there's lots of examples. I've sort of worked across, products that are decision automation engines, that sort of map the mind of a lawyer and the forks in the road along the way, that if this then that type journeys, and that's 100% co-design, right? Like you're saying, well, we have a tool with all these fancy ways of sort of journeying you through the start to the finish, from a question to an outcome. But we can't bloody write the thing. We need your input, right? That outcome needs to be a problem that you're constantly solving, right? So tell me how you journey through your mind. So that's 100% co-design. It's saying, you're asking a lot of those sort of questions. You're mapping that out from a mind map perspective, or just a decision tree perspective, and then you're applying it to the technology that you're bringing to the table and saying, well, we can't ask it this way because the product doesn't work that way. But how about, instead of asking a yes/no question at this point, how about we give them some choices instead? Oh, okay, that's interesting. What would those choices be if that was the case? Oh, there's actually more than a yes/no. Oh, that, and then you sort of journey down that path of co-designing, right? Like you're taking your position of expertise around the product and the technology, and there's a respect for your role there. And then there's a respect for the expert at the end that knows the journey, that knows how to reach the decision, the lawyer, the accountant, whatever it is, and you're respecting their input, right? You're not there to say, well, that's wrong, because they're the expert, right? So it's very co-designed, and that's one example. And the second example I could give you guys is, with Syncly at the moment, what we do is we write integrations. We're an integration platform. So often what we're asked to do is to say, hey, you guys have got this great engine that helps push data around between systems. Do you support system ABC? And often the answer is no, we don't yet, but that's interesting. What's your use case, right? Why do you want to push data from A to ABC? And at that point, again, we look at the client and we say, well, what's the workflow? And it's not just about sort of writing a technology integration and then just, it's done. It's about trying to understand the client's workflow. What problem is it that we're solving? What's the user behavior that we need to make sure we don't, modify too much, right? Like, is it a good user behavior, or are we trying to change user behavior through an integration? So then we sit down and we map that out with the client and say, well, tell me about the process. Tell me about your current examples. Tell me about, what you've looked at in the future. Tell me what it is that's driving the need for this integration. Is it a risk problem? Is data at risk of leaking? Is it a time problem? Is it just too time consuming at the moment for you to perform this process manually, right? Is it costing you money? And then we sort of are able to sort of understand, what does success look like? Because we know what problem we're solving. And then if we know what problem we're solving, we can sort of reverse engineer that to the technology. But we can't do that without the client, right? We can't just go, oh yeah, you need ABC. Cool. Let me, give me a month and I'll give it to you. It doesn't work that way. We can't do it in a black box. So yeah, that'd be my examples.
Yeah, no, those are really great. And I think that you mentioned use cases there as well. And I think that also talks a little bit to, using co-design to help determine kind of product market fit. I think Shirli, you had some thoughts about that as well, around kind of examples or ideas of how that might work. Do you have some ideas around that?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that you can think about there with that are quite important. With startups, if you think about it as product market fit, you can get a little bit lost, because you can become it's a little bit too much about the startup and not enough about the client. So I think that that's something that's really important to be careful of if you're a startup. But I think what is really useful is to think about real life learning on the ground. So one of the things that we all need to be aware of is people like Microsoft have millions of people that can give them feedback. And then once that product is placed in a space, you as the user are stuck with the people who have given you millions of feedback who might not be you. So a really good thing for clients in using startups and doing co-design with them is the wonderful thing is that you have the ability to template that thing, that product in a way that meets you. And I'll give you a really, and on the other hand, you get to hear what is it that is a real life problem for a client. So let me give you an example. One of the things that you can use a product like ours for in a workplace is whistleblowing, which is a regulatory pointy end thing. Another thing you might want to do is use it to say, tell me anything, which is a warm, open, cultural fit. So I just had a meeting with a client where they said, we've got a challenge, which is our warm, open, cultural fit of tell me anything has turned into this legal nightmare because it's got all these questions in it that are from the pointy end of whistleblowing, which send a message to people that you should only speak to us if it's urgent and it's whistleblowing. And so we had a workshop around that about, well, what is it that we could do? And at the end of it, what we worked out was a really simple fix. Well, why don't you have two versions of the product? One that sits in the company visually that says, tell me anything. And one that's a direct link from your whistleblowing policy that says report whistleblowing here. And that's a really nice, simple example of co-design, because if you had 100 people in a lab thinking about, including me, who wrote a paper about the continuum of, reporting and whistleblowing, but when you're there with a client and the HR manager saying to you, this is the cultural feel and this is what this does to my cultural feel, that allows you to pivot the whole process and also give that kind of thinking to the next client or the marketplace. So you're developing product market fit, but you're also developing thought leadership in the marketplace about what they might want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
A long example.
Yeah, thanks, Shirley. Another kind of area, maybe for you, Abe, is this exact kind of space, right? You and Martin worked on, smart legal contracts, you work on the tech, you work on the backbone, and then you work on product market fit as you start the company. Where does this technology get what are all these fascinating problems you found that you have the solution for? Has Codesign played a role in that kind of journey so far as you guys have embarked on starting this company?
Yeah, it has. I mean, early days when we didn't have a product, we just had an idea, right? And so we spent a lot of time actually with a large national law firm, helping them think about how just the idea of this particular technology around really contracts as software rather than paper or PDF is the basic idea, right? What can you do with a contract as software versus a PDF getting emailed around? What could that mean for them as a business? And so we co-designed with them, and it wasn't about us. It wasn't about what we wanted to do with this technology. It was about what were the possibilities for them as a business? What were the opportunities? What new businesses could they create and think about when they think about applying the tech? So what we did was we sort of grounded them initially in what the technology is and giving them an appreciation of it. And then we let them talk about different aspects of their business and brainstorm ideas. And from there it was, okay, so of the 10 ideas on the whiteboard here, which of these are things you might be able to pick up pragmatically and run with and have the best bang for buck and best opportunity, and here are the top 2 or 3 that you'll sort of move to the next stage with. So that's just an example of applying co-design. It was in the very early stages of us working in this business, and then as we moved along, we've been able to apply a similar method, but with more of a focus on the software platform we've developed that enables businesses.
Yeah, that's awesome. Shirley, you had your hand up there for a second?
No, I was clapping Abe.
I can't tell what the difference is between a hand up and a clap.
I'll show you, right?
One of them is that way.
Nice.
Got it. That's a raised hand, and that's a round of applause for my colleague.
Okay, that is oddly specific there. I like it.
Yeah. I think there's a good question, Niels, in the chat, which is around the alignment of cost, urgency, timeframes, benefits. And it sort of aligns to what my comment was going to be on Abe's conversation there around not going in with any preconceived idea of what the product needed to be and allowing the client to drive you there. And I think the flip side of that coin with co-design is it can often lead you down a path that is a distraction, right? So as a startup, it's vitally important that you know what you stand for, and you know what your outcome needs to be. Otherwise, you can end up being too broad. And I've always talked about it like a restaurant. If any of you have traveled through parts of Asia, you would have known those restaurants that sell. You can walk into them, and you're in India, and yet they sell pizza, they sell Chinese food. And it's like, well, okay, cool. I know what you're doing there. You're trying to appeal to everybody, but at the same time, I don't go to those restaurants, right? Because if I wanted pizza, I'd go to a pizza restaurant. If I want a curry, I'll go to a curry restaurant. And I think that's the issue with co-design. It sometimes it can lead you down to going, yeah, we can do that. Of course, we can do that. The tech, but do we want to do that? Or how hard is it to say no to this opportunity? Because it's going to lead us down a path that won't guide us back. And I think if you kind of align it to the question around, what is it? Urgency, cost, and alignment hinders the ability to properly do it. Do you have any recommendations / ROI to share these challenges? And I think if my portion, it's a difficult question to answer quickly, but my portion of that is to say, know your boundaries, where you can and cannot go, right? That's not just about the pure tech. What can the tech can or cannot do, right? What can blockchain do or not do? It's just about knowing where you want to go and where you want, how far off the garden path you want to go. That will allow you to at least co-design, right? Allow the client to say, well, that's a great idea, but it's sort of a little bit off piece for us. How about we come back and look at a slightly different way, which allows for a bit more of a specific use of time, which I guess leads to an ROI. I'm not sure, Steve, if that's helpful input at all, or if anyone else has any answers to that question.
I think there's a flip side of that analysis as well, Stu, because I think that one of the fundamental questions that needs to be asked at the beginning is, why are we co-designing? And I think that needs to be asked by the client and the provider, right? And Steve's given you a thumbs up. And I say that because as a client, co-design requires a much higher degree of skill than just buying something that you can touch and feel that's already been used and is there. So I think that, where you want to do a co-design as a client is where you've got a problem that needs to be resolved, that has a lot of return on investment for you if you can fix it, and there isn't anything available off the shelf that's going to fix it for you.
Yep.
So, and I think that one of the reasons that it's interesting to start talking about co-design at this particular time is because of the explosion of technology and the digitization of the world. And one of the things that I think co-design does give you, and this is Steve's question about return on investment, most clients buying technology only use a small portion of the capability of the technology that they buy. And so one of the things that I think technology sometimes gives you is the ability to stretch what you're using a piece of technology for, so that you get more bang for your buck and less technology in your workplace. So I think that the really important message from me is both the client and the provider have to ask the question, why are we discussing a collaboration rather than just a click?
Exactly. It has to be mutually beneficial, right? Like you could get asked, hey, you're a chef, can you cook me a pizza? Well, no, because I specialize in Italian, in curry, right? But so no, that doesn't fit me. Go and talk to a pizza chef, right?
Yeah, but if my child's anaphylactic, if I'm in Asia and my child's anaphylactic,
Can you cook?
then I may want the chef to cook me something from scratch, so I know what's in every single ingredient.
Cook me that curry, but without these pieces of the pie, right? Okay, cool. Yeah, I cook curry. I can then take a bit away from that, or I can add something to that. But you're not asking me to go too far off piece, and I think that's the key, right? And yeah.
No, that's amazing. The other thing I was thinking as I was listening to that is around timeframes. So does it help when you're doing co-design to have a good delineation on, sometimes, and as YBF we work with a lot of, corporate organizations as well. And sometimes you get stories about how people have taken co-design to be far too open-ended. They just let it kind of drag and just, it became like a good chat, like several good chats. But to frame it into the creative period will be from here to here, and then we'll make a decision. It's less. Is that something you guys have seen?
Funny you should say that, Niels. It's so funny you should say that, because we made, after the meeting that we all had, so everyone, Stu, Abe, Niels and I all had a meeting on co-design. I went back to the office and said, I've had an epiphany. And they said, what's the epiphany? I said, the epiphany is that we sometimes confuse going in and just putting a product in place with co-design. So we're sometimes co-designing when we really should be just tweaking the product. And that's frustrating for both us and the client. So I spun up a new contract, and it's called Design Workshop Contract. And it's a separate contract, and it spells out, what co-design is, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, what we're going to need from the client, what we're going to put in. And that's like a collaboration agreement. And that was great, because that happened 2 weeks ago. And, a couple of clients went, yes, that's exactly what we want. And a couple of clients said, can you just give us the product and tell us what to do? And both of those answers are fabulous. But at least we all know where we stand.
Because co-design is a very powerful tool, but it's double-edged because it's so powerful in that you can, if you just sort of do it without the framing, it could go anywhere, right? Which is actually not very useful. So a lot of the preparation work to make it effective is to really understand the framing and the context you're coming in with, so that it's useful for everyone.
Yes, I mean, sorry, you go, Shirley.
No, you go, Stu.
Oh, look, I was going to quote Steve Jobs, bless his heart. But, he was famous for saying people don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? And so that's the opposite of co-design. It's like, well, I don't need to know what your input is. But if you look at that process of how he designed the iPhone and how he designed, Mac OS and things, there was co-design in parts of it, right? He said, I'm going to design a phone and I'm the expert in some of these areas, but I do need people's input, right? Like, and he was famous again for when he invented the mouse and he put it in front of a young child, and it was very natural for that person to click, right? And then all of a sudden, and that's co-design, right? That's someone affirming an idea, or maybe that child would have gone back and gone, well, this mouse is too big, I can't hold it, it needs to be smaller. So at the same time, and that's the same thing, right? There's a framework. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's my framework. And then, inside that, I just need validation of my idea, perhaps, or there's an element of this journey that I do need that expert input for. And that helps you, again, make sure you don't go too broad.
And Stu, building on that and what Abe said, there are two ways to do co-design. One is that you start with a blank piece of paper and you build together. But the other is what Harvard calls a one text, which is what you're describing, which is you say, here's the toy, pull it apart, play with it, show it to people and give me the feedback. And that can be, that's a valid way of co-design. And building on Abe, the thing that we added as well, which I think is really important, is to specify not only the time period, but also what is the output. What is it that we are going to give you after the co-design workshop, so that you don't have massive different expectations of what that is going to land up with.
No, I think that's a really good point, Shirley. It's actually touching into kind of the next thing to kind of turn this into, because if you look for an ROI or or a well-defined point of how you run the process. At the beginning, you get good agreements and good sense for what you're aiming towards. Then the facilitation through that process becomes really important to keep things moving forward. So I know, Abe, you've done a lot of these things around specifically the kind of facilitation of these kind of processes. And I think some of the people here in the audience might not be natural facilitators of, co-design processes. So what's some of the things that you would recommend for people that don't have a natural way of kind of structuring co-design processes, but still would like to embark on, a process like that with a client they might have or a potential customer? What are some of the key things to keep an eye on once someone has said yes for a 4 to 8 week sprint with you to go and co-design something? Like, what's really key there?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't recommend trying to run co-design not having seen it, because I think or been in it, right? So, and I think in the last 5 years, it's come common enough that a lot of people will have seen it and felt it, but you want to have been in it. I started by being a participant in them as opposed to running them, and you get a feel, like there's a feeling. Well done co-design has a feeling to it in the room, in the virtual room, I guess, in this world. And the feeling is, hey, I'm part of something exciting and creative, and we're doing something together and it's fun. That's what you want to be feeling in the room, because it's with that relaxation that you can kind of get out and really bounce ideas off each other, not feel like I'm going to say something silly and dumb and it's going to get shut down. You need that sort of feeling in the room. So you want to have been a participant in that before you try and become a facilitator. But once you sort of seen that a bit, you can go, I see where and how I want this to be. And the good thing is there are some good tools out there now. When I went to do some co-design recently, I sort of went back and had a look, and Google Design, for example, got some really good materials in terms of how to frame up a process, how to run it. And then there's a lot of, I'll call them games. They're not quite games, but they're little facilitation tools you can use in a process to help get the creative juices going and people thinking in the right way. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. But I guess the one word of caution is, I'd say for every 1 productive hour in a co-design workshop, there's 3 or 4 hours of preparation sitting behind it, right? So you've got to do the work. And a lot of it comes to what we talked about earlier, which is the framing, the context, the making sure you're focusing this thing in the right direction. Otherwise, it'll just go off in a tangent that's not very productive for anyone.
Yep. I've been in those workshops, right, where you just go, what's the outcome here? It hasn't been facilitated, it hasn't been proper prep, there hasn't been proper understanding of the problem we're trying to solve. And great, we're all in there and we're ideating, we're using design thinking and all these great ways of doing it, digital whiteboards, and we're breaking out, we're making lists, but you kind of get reach the end of the day and all you're thinking about is how we're going to catch up for a beer, because like I've lost the purpose of the day, right? What's the outcome here? And then the other thing is, I think there needs to be sort of follow-ups and touch points. This is what we learned, and these are the things that I need to dig into deeper, right? These are the things that we're going to leave behind. And it needs to be that proper engagement. Otherwise, it can kind of just be this great day where you all go out and have, like I said, at the end of the day, catch up and have a drink, but you've achieved nothing from that process. So, yeah, framing, I think you've hit the nail. It needs to be framed properly, and it does need to be facilitated properly. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. I certainly can't do it myself.
Yeah.
I've learned another very interesting lesson, because co-design is much easier for me because that's my happy place, because it fuses where I was and where I am. The challenge I've found is that often there's a tension between the people in the room who have signed up for the co-design and who want that larger collaborative stretch, and the people who are higher up the tree who are signing off on the money. And often that hasn't been properly internally negotiated. So especially if you have a change up the top of the tree, that happens a lot. So in other words, you're moving in a direction, you've agreed to a process, you're designing, you've got a timeline, and then somebody further up, usually a CFO, says, what's the when are we getting it, how much it's going to cost, and when are you rolling it out? And so one of the big things that I think is really important is that people are really encouraged to make sure that they have their own backs covered up high, so that the decision makers are in on the collaborative process, because collaboration gives you a much better outcome. But Abe says it's an hour prep for an hour on the ground. It's actually an hour prep, an hour project management, an hour on the ground, an hour follow-up, an hour feedback, and then a reiteration. So it's a 6 hour, right?
I think you're right.
And you've got to be up for that.
Is there any input? I think what my question to you guys is, if that's the role, I can play asking questions as well. But is when in the journey you're like, hey, we're interested, to hey, we're buying. When do you go, okay, let's co-design, right? Because what your point there, Shirley, is saying, well, you can kind of enter these things too early before there's corporate buy-in, before there's executive buy-in, and you're like, well, that's a great exercise, guys, but like I don't know how that gets me to the outcome, to the deadline sort of thing. So
and that's why, Stu, I said you need it. That's why I say, that's why I went to the aha moment. You actually need to have a contract that says this is what we're doing. And Ian Boyd has asked a really good question, which is, what criteria would you set on a potential co-design partner? Exec buy-in, commitment to action, dollars available, etc. But one of the other things that I think is critical is for you as the provider and the client that you're working with, i.e. not the exec, but the client that you're working with, to be able to critically identify why it is that a co-design process is better than any other off-the-shelf solution. Because I think unless you can articulate that for the people who've got the purse strings, they're quite justifiable in saying, well, what the hell are you all doing this?
My experience on that front is the usual, well, it's not the only reason, but the one that comes up biggest is being able to get buy-in from the business for the change itself, right? So by doing co-design, you're not forcing the change on the people who will be the recipients of it, which it never really works. The co-design process done well enables that buy-in, which is like so important. There's lots of other benefits to co-design, but that one there is like huge.
Yeah.
So that's the question that really is at the base of all of this that organisations often struggle with, which is, are we sure that we all want the change? And my experience is often that where you have a problem with the co-design is because you've put yourself in a place where you are the fulcrum of those people who want the change and those people who might not want the change, and actually naming that and being able to say, can we have a chat about this, because this is about your change process, not your technology. Actually being able to name that is incredibly valuable.
And how about, exactly. And how about signals? So when you're talking to a client or to a potential kind of partner in co-design at the larger end of town, so to speak, the larger mature organizations, you can hear things like, look, we've thrown this challenge at numerous of our regular, service providers, and no one has been able to kind of crack this for us, but we still want it fixed. Or there could be an archetype where people say, we think this is a really good opportunity, but we're not sure, and we're kind of exhausted our own internal ways of proving it out. We need some sort of a proof of concept for us to really be sure that this is an opportunity that we can chase. There's some kind of signals maybe that kind of come up. Are those kind of examples that resonate, or are there other examples of things that you can hear in your initial kind of conversations you can listen out to say maybe that becomes an opportunity to talk about some co-design? Any thoughts there, Abe, maybe?
I think the sort of comments you made then are the sorts of ones that will get your ears pricked up a little bit. I think there is a dynamic that goes on. If I sort of reflect back a little bit, you usually got some champions inside the organization who want to follow this process, have seen it before, can see the benefit, and then you typically got some others who are resistant, and that's just a natural dynamic, I guess, that you just have to play out. It's sort of like, there's no, I don't know if there's an easy answer to it, but you've got to be really, have your sort of spidey senses out for it and going, is this something that's just going to get, you know, not going to fly in this organization? They're not really, they haven't, I don't say maturity is the right word, but just they're not open to it. That's, and you've got to make the judgment call, because it can, I guess, hit you in the face in the other direction if things don't work out and you can't make it. The organization isn't open.
Yeah, sounds good.
Niels, I think what Abe said before is really critical, and I want to circle back to it. So what Abe said before is, normally if you're doing co-design, it's because you're part of a change process. And I think that's a really important thing to remember as a technology company, because sometimes with tech companies, you've got a lot of people who are really technically excellent, but they're not necessarily agents of change. So my big advice is, when you hear things like, no one has fixed this before. We had a very large institution that said to us, no one has fixed this before. The problem we want to solve is we want all of our data in one place. We don't want it coming through 32 channels. Can you do that for us? Great. So we spent months on co-design, which was fantastic, at the end of which we realized why they had never fixed it before, because a couple of the key players said to me in private, we actually don't want the data all in one place, because it's going to be really difficult to know which of our departments control it if it's in one place. And we're not ready for that change yet. And so just remembering what Abe says, when you're listening to the signals, the question I think that's really critical for both the client and the provider. If you're a startup, you need to say, are we in the business of providing technology? And or do we have the skills to hold a change space? And if the answer is we don't have the skills or the fat or the headspace to hold the change space, then the answer is no. And from the client perspective, before you go into that, it's are we buying technology, and are we doing a change, or are we doing both? And let's be honest and upfront about which of those three things we're doing, because the worst case scenario is if we tell everyone we're buying technology, but actually we're doing a change.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. It's also interesting maybe to explore the inverse a little bit. I mean, there's a bit of a trend, if you like, going on where you have really long sales cycles on business-to-business sales, right? Where you have these involved co-design, working big solutions. You have quite an expensive business-to-consumer, unless it's word of mouth. So a lot of SaaS companies are doing this kind of bottoms-up way into the company, where it's a very standardized, productized thing where people can whip out their credit card, pay for something, $1,000 per month per subscription, whatever the price is.
Yeah, that's okay. No worries. I've just got a webinar playing in the background, so I don't mind that noise.
Never mind. Thank you.
We're background noise.
Marissa.
Oh my God.
That's okay. You made my day, Marissa. I love the background noise.
That's awesome. So the question is, I guess, when not to do co-design. So are there situations where you're talking to a potential client and you actually don't want to go for a co-design process that's very involved, but you want to make it really simple? Do you guys have any examples around how you're thinking about, maybe Stu, aren't you thinking about Syncly? Is that a choice you have to make, or thinking you're doing about product market fit and how you design your products to either do co-design or kind of try and almost avoid it?
Yeah, it really is. I was about to use an expletive there. A really difficult decision to make, right? Because I've just been given you can open that, darling. Okay. It really can cost you money. And I think that's the challenge. We go through it like almost monthly at Syncly, where we're given opportunities because people trust us, people know us. They realize that we understand the industry or the space that they're asking us to work with them on. And there's money on the line. And you're like, well, we need money. It's really critical to us, but that can cost money in the long run, right? It can take you down a path that you don't want to be in. It can end up being a product that is not a repeatable buying use case. So I think, you know, you have to sit back as a startup and go, well, does anybody else want this? You know, are we going to go down and build something that's so unique to this client that there's an element that other people might want, but we just like breaking that up and then reselling it is just not possible, right? I think you really need to protect your time and that kind of, especially in the early stages, those potential distractions that clients can lead you on. They don't do it on purpose, obviously, right? They you know, they're doing it to offer you, you know, a deal opportunity. But yeah, so I think making sure that it's a repeatable business model, making sure that it fits with your vision for your product, staying tight to your vision is also a very difficult thing. But, you know, remain true to that, have those hard conversations. And I think from that perspective, you're then able to sort of say to the client, you know, it's okay to say no, right? Like if you say no, if you say to a client, look, it's just not core to what we do. But let me introduce you to somebody who can help you. This is a bit bespoke. So what you probably need is a bespoke developer. We can fit a portion of this maybe in 12 months time as a phase 2 for what you're looking at. That's also really valuable, right? Because you're maintaining the relationship. You've been honest with them. You've saved them time and money by saying no. And you're able to then go back and focus on the deals that really progress your vision and your product as you want it to be. So I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but I think, you know, that's certainly the pain point that we feel all the time. It's really hard to say no to opportunities that are being presented to you. But you know, that's something that you have to work with your business partner on, or if it's, you know, if you're the only one to talk to your wife about it over a wine or your husband, you know, you got to talk it out. It's not easy.
Yeah. Shirley, any thoughts on that one? I saw you made a comment.
I thought that Stu is spot on. And I think the other two things I'd ask is what business am I in and what skills do I have in the business? Because it comes back to, you know, if part of your business is being an agent of change or the handmaiden of change, which some of the software is, and then you may have the skills. But then it comes back to the next thing, which was my epiphany after speaking to all of you, which is that has a value and it has a cost. Mm-hmm. So I think where all of us sometimes go a little bit awry or people get resentful is where there isn't an output that is valuable, but it would be quite a fun thing to do. And we do have the skills, but we don't charge for it. So I think a really honest conversation is, yes, we can do it. Yes, we have the skills to do it. Yes, we would love to do it. But the cost of this for us is X thousand dollars. Are you happy to meet that cost? Rather than pretending that that's part of a sales cycle.
Yeah, that's bang on, actually. And that addresses a couple of questions that are filtered through here. Buy-in, right? Like money, skin in the game, you know, charge for it, right? But don't just charge your daily rate for it, because there is a cost, right? There's a cost to the distraction. There's a cost to your resources not working on other, maybe more critical things, right? So build in the fat around that and say, look, there's 5 days effort here, but there's also 10 days worth of distraction here for us, right? You know, there's another deal while I'm working on this, there's another deal that isn't progressing, which also costs me money, right? So be honest with yourself around what the cost of that is. Make sure you present that and they're paying for it and there's skin in the game, which means they have to go up the chain and get approval in some circumstances. Yep.
Yes, and Stu, in answer to your first question, which is that the output of that design is not only valuable here, but it's valuable to the silo in which you're providing other services.
Yep.
Then I think that it's legitimate for you just to give them the cost of your daily rate. Yep. And to think about recovering the rest of that cost from the value that each of you are deriving. But there's one other point I want to raise here, and it's my legal background. The other really important thing that people have to think about at this point is the copyright. When you do the co-design, like they are spending huge amounts of time with you on this product, that variation of the product, who does that belong to and how can each of you use it? And that's an incredibly important discussion to have.
It really is. And we've actually gone through we're going through the process right now with a client who, exactly that, right? We saw the opportunity. We said, this is a resellable product because I know that there are 300 other clients that buy the same product. So this integration's arguably sellable to 3 other more clients. And initially they put a proposal in front of us, a master services agreement in front of us that claimed the IP for those enhancements. And so I was really quite wary of that. But eventually the client said, well, okay, that's fine. You know, you're doing this at cost price. When we were doing this at literally cost price. Like we weren't making any money off this. But my one provider was that we were able to take that IP and resell it afterwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really good inputs, guys. And kind of as we're coming up to the last kind of couple of minutes of the session, any other questions that come up, just post them in the chat and see if we can close them out. And with only a few minutes to go. In the meantime, the only final thing kind of on my mind to get you guys to kind of weigh in on is, now if you are someone who look to kind of interact with, you know, startups like ourselves and the community and kind of trying to find these kind of startup solutions, what recommendations do you have in identifying kind of who you can work with as opposed to just relying on cold calling to come in? So there's obviously, you know, the Legaltech hub where a lot of legal techs come together and working on this stuff. There are centers like YBF to go through. There is communities that you could log into. What do you have any recommendations? Like, now, let's say I'm an interested person that looks at, okay, I love to co-design on a problem that I have. How do you identify who to contact and who to kind of interact with? Any thoughts on that for the final few minutes that we have?
Sure, I've got a direct answer there, but one thing to think about is where in the process you would bring in the startups and tech companies to work with you. Because one path would be to actually run some co-design internally around the broader domain, after coming out of that, narrow down on the opportunities, if that makes sense, and then look at the landscape for the startups that can help you in those areas. So it's sort of a one way at it, I guess, in terms of trying to think through where to go, because obviously a lot of startups will be focused in certain domains.
Yeah, Shirley, maybe a couple seconds.
Yeah, I'm still thinking. Stu, did you want to add what I think?
I'll save you, Shirley.
Come back to me.
Look, yeah, come back to you. Startups are awesome to work with, right? Because they want your business. They haven't yet gone down such a road that their product is immovable, or at least a slow-moving, you know, Titanic. So, you know, that's one of the big upsides, and that's kind of why, I mean, we've signed some clients that we perhaps shouldn't have, right, in an ordinary world, but they're doing that with us because they know they're getting our creativity, they know they're getting their input and influence over the product, and that's like, I mean, you know, you try calling up Microsoft and having input to any of their products, right? They're going to, who are you? You know, you're not NASA, so please go away. Yeah. You know, that's the case, right? So yes, reaching out to startups, I think, is a really positive thing. Reach out to them in the right frame, right? Where Abe said, you know, make sure you know what you're asking them. You know, have some respect for the fact that startups don't have unlimited resources. So, you know, come to the table with something.
I'll see that we come up for time. So just wanted to thank everyone, and, you know, big round of thumbs up if you're up for it for the panel. Thanks a lot for your time and your great inputs. That was really, I picked a lot up from that, even though we've already had a couple of conversations on that. So it was really phenomenal. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the inputs for everyone attending, and, you know, have a great day. If you have follow-up, there's a lot of information on the Legaltech Hub and other places that you can find more information. But for now, thanks a lot for coming, and we'll see you guys soon.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.